My name is Lloyd Duhon. I am going to be moderating this panel today, and we're going to be talking about the budget process from 2025. We're performing a retrospective on that budget process. And I have some great guests with me today. What's very interesting about this set of guests is that this is every era of Cardano's budget process. Charles and I had conversations in civics before there was even such thing as a budget committee. We had Kriss Baird, who was part of the original cohort of the budget committee. Kriss Kowalsky was then elected as in the first elected cohort to the committee, and then Megan Hess was elected in the second cohort. The budget committee is now fully elected by the community. And Kriss was re-elected to that role, so that was a hands up. And so what I wanted to start with today, I wanted to start with from the newest to the farthest in history. So, Megan, what was it like for you to come into the budget process later in the game, after the pivot? What was that experience like for you?
Well, first of all, thanks, Lloyd, for having me. Thanks, everyone, for having me here. It's an honor to be here on this panel and speaking today. It really goes back to why did I even put my candidature in for the budget committee at all? It was to be more involved in the conversation and have better access to the information. I think it's challenging for community members and everyday devs and builders to have the right access to the information just because of the sheer volume and the variety of sources it can come from. So it was really about getting into the room and seeing, how things were really going on from the inside.
Thank you, Megan. So let's move a little further in. And so, Kriss Kowalsky, you became the chair now of the budget committee. So, what's looking forward like now that you've been elected as the chair? How is that looking?
Well, thank you for having us here. I think at this point where we have a milestone almost behind us, we have gathered a lot of sentiment. And just 2 days ago, when we started the governance days, the sentiment was turning very positive. And people looking forward ahead, how to shape the governance, the ecosystem, and really running the decentralized governance. It's a positive outlook. We are seeing a lot of good conversations on X, in person, and I think it's going to shape in the next 2 years into really nice, respectable process that other blockchains are going to see, oh my God, what you're doing. You're so advanced.
Yeah, thank you, Kriss. Now, Kriss, let's dig in a little deeper there. What do you feel like is going to be what's the best way that we can involve the community further in shaping the process into the future?
So, a few weeks ago, we kicked off a internal retro of us sitting in the committee and around. And now we have an open survey for Intersect members. It's going to be then open to whole community. The our governance is also collecting retro feedback. And after that, somewhere in September, we'll have first results. We'll know the sentiment, what went wrong, what went good. We will hear first impressions how to do the 26 budget. Hopefully on the Cardano Summit we will show the results and show the first framework of the next budget. And then have it ratified by D-Reps so we can start in Q1 with 26 budget. Not delay, not wait in August, because all of the builders needs to be happy and not wait August.
Perfect, thanks. That's a great segue to go to Kriss Baird here. So, Kriss, I know one of the bigger issues, you, of course, helped with Project Catalyst and got Project Catalyst. So you were doing Treasury withdrawals from Catalyst from the early days. What do you see are the differences? What's the impact of the change between what it was in Catalyst and what it is to be on the budget committee?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great question, Lloyd. And I think before we get into that, let's just take a moment as a community to recognise what we've just done. We have just created the first nation-state governance for the blockchain that has now been enacted. We've seen the first budget cycle go through. Everyone's participated in it. It's not been without challenge, but we've now come through the other side with now an opportunity to look back on what went well, what didn't go well, and build a pathway towards improving it for the future. The most important thing that we can do is develop muscle memory around any of these governance processes. If we leave it an entire year to come back and do this, we're going to have forgotten what it was like the first time around. And that might be a good thing in certain sentiments, but really, in other sentiments, we just need to keep going. And we need to all believe that we've got trust in each other to be able to make good on our promises and our commitments to, good spending, good financial fiduciary responsibility, good ecosystem health, like we're investing into the right things. Like, I think when we look at the differences between Catalyst and this Treasury process, Catalyst is very much about open innovation. It's like, we do not know what the answers are to the questions that we need to answer, right? Or we need to ask. So let's just have anybody put up their ideas, and let's see what comes out of it. With this Treasury process, we can be a lot more strategic. We can be like, we know this is what needs to be funded in order to take us from where we are today to where we want to get to. So we need to build strategy around that, build the confidence within the community and the stakeholders that are ultimately going to invest into it, and the ideas by getting behind it with votes, and then building the campaign so we get buy-in from this community. I think that's the main difference, right? That we are now trying to operate as more of a whole rather than many disparate sort of parties trying to fight for their best idea to get over the post.
Absolutely, and that is a great segue to talk to Charles for a minute. Because, Charles, we just did 2 long, important, sometimes challenging, sometimes grueling days discussing a retrospective of all this. And we have something of a solution that we're sort of working toward, that we're suggesting that people digest and consider what the implications of that would be. And we start to talk about how we do set strategy and sometimes how that might look like a return of some sort of executive function. So how does it feel to kind of come full circle from we gave up all of this executive control out of I.O. and out of the founding entities and burned those keys, and now we're back where we might find that there is some merit to some executive function? How's that?
Well, every government in the world has executive function. Every government in the world has executive function. And your stool has 3 legs to it. Our stool has 3 legs to it. So you have judicial, legislative, and executive. So we have too much executive function. So what do? You get rid of it for a while. And you let the legislative and judicial function kind of build itself up, assert itself, and you see how far they can go before they start stumbling and running into problems. And typically the problems are of coordination, the problems are of execution, the problems are fast, agile adaptation to environmental changes, like when a black swan event happens or death happens or a company fails. These are the types of problems executive function is very nice for. So the vision thing, right? And after you let your judicial legislative go, then at some point they say, okay, well, maybe we need to reintroduce it, but we have to introduce it differently. And there's kind of some rules you have to follow if you don't want to get screwed. So first, whenever you create an executive function, at the same time as you create it, you create the oversight mechanism for it. So you never fund just one, you fund both. So there has to be some group of people that executive function reports to, holds that executive function accountable, honest, and then you also at the same time develop a ripcord that you're able to basically defund or shut down that executive function. This is one of the biggest problems in the U.S. government right now. They create all these agencies, and after they create the agency, there's no way to get rid of the agency. So when the agency fails, what they do is they create another agency to compensate for the failures of the prior agency. So that's why we have like 16 intelligence agencies, and that's why we have the Department of Homeland Security and the intelligence czar at the DNI and these types of things. They say, you know what we need to do? Let's create another agency. That'll solve the problem. Maybe we shut the goddamn agency down. I don't know. So you have to have the ability to shut them down, and you have to have the ability to force them to merge and consolidate. And typically, you create the executive function. They say, oh, well, I need to fix it. And so then you create the oversight. And say, oh, well, and I need to make something better. Well, I can't reform the agency, so I'll create another one. So we can't make that mistake in Cardano land, and we shouldn't blindly, for the sake of short-term competitiveness, walk into that trap. So my thought process is that you just give time for people to have the discussion, and you start with some very focused activities that really do need some form of surgical oversight. So a great example would be like the Cardano Sovereign Wealth Fund as a try before you buy. So let's go through those design principles. So you don't just create it, you create an oversight committee, so a governance board for it at the same time. And what's your ripcord? Well, with a Sovereign Wealth Fund, they can just sell all their assets, go back into ADA, and donate it back to the Cardano Treasury. So there's a mechanism, if you design it the right way, where legally the ADA holders can liquidate it at any time and basically recover sans whatever is locked, and then you'll just have to wait out that period to liquidate. Well, that's a really nice try before you buy, because now you're talking about a highly specialized group of people that do one thing that, if we pull it off, creates ubiquitous value for the ecosystem. Namely, you take a passive asset that's mono assets, just ADA, doesn't produce the yield, and you turn it to a managed active asset that produces yield, which could generate tens to hundreds of millions of dollars of value for the Cardano ecosystem as a whole. So that, in principle, is a pretty good idea. And by having that, you can then use it to do things like equity investments and ventures in the Cardano ecosystem, and actually have the stock of these ventures be owned by the Cardano ecosystem as a whole, as a real-world asset. There's all types of creative things you can do, but you can crawl, walk, run with that. And then once you have that, you say, okay, well, that's executive function at the end of the day. You have a committee of people that run that thing, and they do it on behalf of the ecosystem, and they have some autonomy with it. Well, then now you can move on to marketing, branding, growth. And then you can move on to budget reconciliation, you move on to vision thing. And the community can get gradually comfortable. Maybe it takes a year or 2 years or 3 years for us to actually get there. It's okay. All we're trading off is short-term execution ability. So we'll preserve and conserve what we have, but we are not trading that for some short-term gain. We're doing it in a very deliberate and considerate way. So overall, I'm very happy with the progress that's been made. I'm very happy with how we've managed to close out this year, and the fact that we're already able to have the discussion of what we want to change, to update the Constitution. We have a community-elected constitutional committee. Interim roles are phasing out at Intersect and other places, being replaced with members' roles. It's an indication of extremely healthy structure.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. That's good. Let's bring this to a close with those kind of thoughts. So we've got 3 members that are active, that are elected to the Budget Committee, and we are looking forward now. So each of you, in your own turn, where do you see your place in helping to continue this process of helping to find the appropriate amount of work toward funding these things in Cardano, where we should stop, where are our bounds, and where should we continue to make those efforts?
Well, I don't know if I have a full answer to this, but I'll
No one
talk
does.
about what's been on my mind about all of this is really digesting all of the information. Like when we talk about an executive function, I think myself, for example, and probably a lot of us have an initial repulsion to that, of not wanting concentration of power to form, or even a perceived concentration of power. So I think it comes back to our communication and how we can have these conversations, because as we all just listened to Charles talking about it, there is a lot of nuance to it, which doesn't necessarily come out in the headline of, let's introduce an executive function into our governance. So I think, more community tooling and conversation spaces where some of these nuances are able to come out, and some more clarity into the real boundaries of such a role, I think would be a great initial important piece.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. It's important to note no one has all these answers. So it's great that we have partial answers and that we're trying those things. Kriss, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about consolidating and consolidation from the conversations that we've been having, all of the discussions, all the disparate communications, trying to find a steady stream and a pathway to being able to realise like these these aims of like making communications easy for people to get hold of and understand. I mean, I think really importantly, we need to have trust in each other as a community that we can do this. This isn't like you got crazies that are running around that are just going to go and spend hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cryptocurrency on crazy ideas that have no absolute impact. I think we're a bit more mature than that as an ecosystem and as a body of people that care about making growth and making great change happen in this. So if we go into it with the understanding that there are well-intentioned people that are pretty good at what they do, and that are open to being informed and consultative with the community, and that anybody else in the community has just as equal level playing field as fulfilling some of those roles, then we're putting ourselves into a pretty good position for the future, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree there, Kriss. And Kriss K, what about you? You're obviously in the leadership role of the budget committee. So where are our limitations? Where do we set some guardrails for ourselves as a committee?
That's a good question, and I really need to think about. First of all, the Cardano Budget Committee, as it's called, who are we budgeting? The Cardano community or Intersect? We are budgeting Intersect, but what we are doing has impact on the whole Cardano ecosystem. We are setting up example for any other budget. We had 5 budgets this year. There is room for more budgets, and they don't have to invent the wheel. They can see what we have done. Being cognizant of the human expenditure, we spent over 8 years. 8 years was spent into this budget process by every participant. We had a cost of $7.8 million in work across everybody, DREPs, civics, SPOs, vendors, Intersect, everybody who participated. And that's a big effort. I think it's a positive effort because next year it's going to be lower amount. We are learning from our mistakes, and I think as a budget committee, we need to be listening, but also motivating actors to become active. Yesterday we heard that DREPs are not meeting, SPOs are meeting. Let's have an assembly. Let's have a meeting point where decision makers, the legislature branch is going to come and listen, but also say what they want. Then we can then mold it and present, okay, this is how this looks, what you want. Is this okay? Let's change it, let's improve it. Let's have next iteration better, second one even better.
Absolutely.
And just to point out the numbers there, we didn't spend at Intersect $7.8 million.
No.
Just to make sure people understand. It's
That was
very, very easy.
volunteer.
And the fucking Twitter is going to make
Yeah.
that horrible.
Right.
Okay. There's $7.8 million in uncompensated, mostly uncompensated labor cost as it relates to the budget.
Right.
And how you get there is you look at the total hours expended and you put a $100 per hour price tag on that because you're professionals. You could be writing code. You could be doing lawyer stuff. You could be doing accounting stuff. That's how much time was exhausted going through this process. And there's an actual calculation that was done. Talking about the DREPs voting on the 39 proposals, putting the budget proposals together, all these other things. So that's an estimate to the human capital cost of what we've done. The reason this is relevant is because we don't factor that in. And we think that everybody's just willing to work for free forever. So when you create a social process where the execution of that process requires $8 million of unpaid labor, if you allow that to persist, the next social process will be $15 million in unpaid labor, then $30 million in unpaid labor. There's a process problem. That was one of the reasons why we pushed very aggressively to bring people together to talk about the budget, because it doesn't make sense to require people to spend uncompensated $8 million of human labor across the world to get a budget closed. And that's one of the things executive function does. And Lloyd is one of those people, by the way, who's probably part of that 7.8 million. I think we probably owe you 300,000 in labor costs.
Yeah, that's quite a, yeah, it's been a couple of years of continuous effort on this one process. So, and it's exciting, and it's an honor to have been through to this point, to see this, actually happen, to actually see that we have funded community projects, including IO, including Tweeg, including Intersect, including Catalyst. We have funded these incredible things that are delivered to the community and are a betterment to Cardano. And that's what this effort has done. With all the warts, with all the problems, with all the pain, that is ultimately what we've accomplished, is we have allocated resources by the community to community participants to further improve our community. So just thank you all for joining me today. Kriss Baird, Megan Hess, Kriss Kowalsky, Charles Hoskinson.
Thank you.
All for your efforts in this. Thank you for your time today, helping us to kind of rehash some of what we went through. And if you guys have questions and you'd like to take the survey, if you are an Intersect member, the survey is published far and wide. We'll make sure there are links out today as well so you can see them. But that survey is extremely helpful as our next step as a budget committee to ensure that we can adapt and move with the needs of the Cardano community. Any final words from the panel?
I would like. Yes?
You're good.
I would like to thank everybody for coming here, and I would like to thank the community that is here for the last 3 days, and that shows that we are doing the right thing, that we have a right movement, of the ball is rolling in right direction, and we just need to be persistent, what Kriss said, and we are all doing the right thing, and we are not playing, we're not buying a Lambo, we are building an ecosystem.
There was a Lambo driving around, but that's another ecosystem, right? But I think the important thing is showing up is what matters, right? Like, we have to show up. We are not going to. No one's going to come and dish this house for us. No one's going to change our ecosystem for us. It's down to us, and that's what we're doing.
And I'll just add to that. Everyone in this room here and listening, I guess, has this invested interest in it. So I think our real target is the people who aren't here, and everyone going back to wherever you're coming from and spreading these conversations and getting people to be involved and helping with that onboarding process that allows them to be part of the conversation.
I guess the final thought is change the dialogue. We've had a long go at it this year where there's just been a lot of toxicity and negativity, especially on X. And we need to be good advocates and go, and when you see people criticizing the process who refuse to be in the room, don't want to participate, but then tear things down, we shouldn't reward those people. There's good faith here. There's strategic differences, philosophical differences, personal differences. Some people like each other, some people don't, but people have showed up regardless of those differences to participate in good faith to make the system as a whole better. This is not some elaborate governance theater to legitimize and validate one entity and give them money. And it's fundamentally unfair when people frame these efforts this way. This is a systematic program to decentralize Cardano and put it on the strongest possible foundation to grow the strongest and most decentralized governing system for everyone everywhere in the world. And so we need to own the narrative and dialogue and say that these iterative events are productive, effective, and they are necessary to get things done. And when you see people spilling a counter narrative to that, fight them. Go to the streets and don't legitimize it. Because they disrupt things. They prevent people from participating. There's more than 1 or 2 D-reps who chose not to come to these things because they were worried about the perception on Twitter. And that's unfortunate because everybody who's delegated to them and their voice is not heard now because of that effort. Did that help the ecosystem? Does that improve the process? Does it make it better? Of course not. It's absurd. And is there any big grand agenda here? We're just basically saying, write the problems down and let's talk about solutions and then let's go vote on it on chain in the most transparent, open way possible. To me, that feels like a pretty good process. So when people say the opposite, you have to slap that down. That's the only way we're going to move forward as an ecosystem. And my hope is the next time we do it, there's 5 times as many people in the room. And the next time we do it, there's 5 times more as many people. We only get there if you exit this process with a positive impression and broadcast that positive impression in as many channels as possible to parrot what you were saying.
Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you, everyone, for your participation on the panel today. Appreciate your time. And thank you, everyone in the audience who gave us your attention today and for being here. We appreciate you. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.